Hello and welcome to Veterans and Parkinson's Exercise, Nutrition, and Wellness. I'm Nancy Nealon, Senior Community Program Manager for the Parkinson's Foundation, New York, New Jersey chapter. On behalf of all of us at the Parkinson's Foundation, welcome to everyone attending today. That includes over 300 plus individuals who registered for the webinar and a special edition for today, webinar watch parties. So I would like to give a big shout out and hello to our first watch party. This is a special gathering for veterans and their care partners to watch this webinar together. So hello to Gloria and everyone watching at the Friedberg JCC in Oceanside, New York. And also a big hello to Paula and everyone who has gathered at the Utica Center for Development Veterans Outreach Center in Utica, New York. And last but not least, all those who have gathered at the Western New York Healthcare in Buffalo, New York. Thank you to everyone who has made these watch parties possible. Our program today will consist of 2 presentations from Parkinson's experts from the VA health system, as well as answering your questions at the end of the webinar. We collect all the questions during the webinar, so you'll see them disappear to organize and ask our presenters at the end. A few webinar watch tips for you. We share a lot of information in these webinars and realize it can be kind of tough to take it all in at once, but not to worry, we have you covered. This webinar is being recorded and you will receive a link via an email from us in about a week. And then you'll be able to watch the recording, any parts of the whole thing all over again at your leisure. So sit back and enjoy. While I say sit back, we also know 2 hours is a long time to sit. So please remember, get up, stretch, go get a snack, do what you need to do. You won't miss anything because you're going to have the recording to refer to. I'd now like to share with you important information about the Parkinson's Foundation. We are the nation's leading community for people living with Parkinson's disease and the people who love them. And we are all working to end this disease. Our mission is to make life better for people with Parkinson's disease by improving care, advancing research towards a cure, and empowering and educating our global community. We offer an extensive set of resources. In fact, I'm going to show you a couple of them live in person here. These are just a few of the examples. Parkinson.org, our free educational book series that you can download or order in hard copy. A library of recorded podcasts and webinars like we're doing today. Our hospital safety kit called the Aware and Care Kit. In addition, our helpline staffed by Parkinson's specialists is ready to assist at 1-800 for PD info. You can contact the helpline to order any of these materials as well that I've mentioned. In addition to webinars such as this, specifically for veterans, we also offer weekly webinars through our PD Health at Home program. Join us for Mindfulness Mondays, Wellness Wednesdays, and Fitness Fridays. These webinars are recorded as well, so you can always go back and watch those. And I'd like to invite any care partners, caregivers watching today to please join us on Saturday, October 29th. If you live near Tarrytown, New York, please consider joining us in person, but this will also be broadcast live on Zoom. We'd love to have you sign up, register, and attend the Northeast Region's Care Partner Summit. I'd also like to share with you that part of the foundation's, the Parkinson's Foundation's commitment is to reach every person living with Parkinson's disease. A critical way we do that is through our partnerships. With more than 110,000 veterans living with Parkinson's disease, the foundation has established a formal partnership with the Veterans Administration with the overarching goal to improve the quality of life for veterans living with PD and their care partners through greater access to education, resources, and support. We have created a web page dedicated to veterans living with Parkinson's at parkinson.org/veterans. On this page is the FAQ guide that provides an overview of Parkinson's disease and VA resources, benefits, eligibility, and access to care. Remember, we're going to send all this to you in our follow-up email as well. We are honored to support all of you during your Parkinson's journey. And next, I'd like to give a big thank you to our sponsor for today's program, Genentech, which is a member of the Roche Group, for their generous grant to support our series of virtual programs for veterans living with Parkinson's. Thank you so much, Genentech. And now, as we get ready to introduce the first speaker, and Dr. Morley is going to come on camera now, we are going to ask for all of you to join us in getting to be able to cast your vote in our first poll. We'll have 2 of the polls today. So if you can take a look, how many days per week do you get at least 30 minutes of exercise? And you can see that you have several choices. And people are voting now, which is great. Thank you so much. Cast your vote. We'll get everyone's opinion on this. You can weigh in. And it's coming in. The results are coming in. I think we're looking pretty good here. All right. So overwhelmingly, well, close to overwhelmingly, five or more days per week, which is fabulous, followed by 3 to 4 days per week. So many of you are already involved, and we hope we can reinforce and provide even more information about exercise and Parkinson's. So now I'd like to invite Dr. Morley to join me, and we will have him come up. I'm not sure, perhaps we're having, no, there he is.
Yep, I think I've
All
clicked
right.
I've clicked all my buttons.
All right, excellent. There are a lot of buttons to keep track of.
Yeah.
So we're going to stop sharing our screen, and I will give Dr. Morley just a second to get his bearings and be able to pull up his screen. And then I will stop talking and turn it over to you, Dr. Morley. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I think I got to switch this, correct? Does that look correct now?
Yes, it's perfect. Thank you.
Super. Yeah, great. Thanks so much for the invitation to do this, and for having this important webinar, and for all the work that the Parkinson's Foundation does, and in particular, the partnership we now have between the VA Padrex and the Parkinson's Foundation. I think it's wonderful. I also want to thank the veterans who were here. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your interest in this topic, and congratulations on exercising so much. I hope I'm not preaching to the converted here, but we'll try to make this informational and have some real world impact. So just to briefly go through an outline of what I'll talk about today, I'm going to talk about sort of the efficacy of exercise, what kind of effects it has on Parkinson's symptoms, with the idea that maybe different exercises could have different effects. I'm going to talk about what we know about activity and exercise levels in people living with Parkinson's disease, in particular, what drives activity levels in Parkinson's disease, and what might we be able to do to increase them. And if we have the time for it, I'll tell you a little bit about some of the work we're doing. And then I'll finish up with kind of a real world summary of how do we prescribe exercise like a medicine for Parkinson's. One of the things I'll try to convince you of is that exercise is a very powerful medicine to treat Parkinson's disease. And so how do we treat it like a medicine? How do we prescribe it? How do we get patients to take it? So this is an outline here of the components of a brain wellness program. You can see that it is multifactorial, involving exercise, diet, stress management, meds, social connection, adequate sleep. Our second speaker, Dr. Duda, is going to talk about a few of these. And so I'll let him kind of talk about the synthesis here. And I'm going to focus in my talk on fitness and exercise. So we all know that exercise is good for you. It does a body good. There are well-documented risk reductions for cardiovascular disease, for all-cause mortality, and for many chronic diseases, we prescribe diet and exercise. The idea that these sorts of interventions should affect brain health is supported by the idea that both dementia and depression, two brain diseases, are reduced by exercise. And we know from epidemiologic and clinical trial data that if you look at cardiovascular fitness, that it's related to scores on cognitive tests in senior citizens, that midlife exercise is related to a reduced risk of dementia. And there's even some imaging type data looking at functional MRI showing that connectivity between different brain regions is influenced by exercise. So clearly exercise affects the brain. And when we look in animal models where we can look in a little bit more detail in what's going on in cells and molecules, we know that important brain growth factors, markers of synaptic connections and the ability of the connections between neurons, the cells in the brain to change, and also for the brains to even grow new cells are all influenced by exercise. And so there's good reason to think that exercise will influence brain diseases. This is not a new idea. This is a graph of how many publications there are looking at exercise and Parkinson's from 2000 to 2020. And you can see that there's a very, very rapid growth. And now we have more than 400 academic papers per year talking in some way or another about exercise and Parkinson's disease. This is also to apologize in advance that obviously I can't possibly cover everything that's going on, but we can start to talk about, what does exercise mean? It can mean different things to different people. There's four main categories that people think about, and those are shown here with some examples. So aerobic or endurance exercise, strength exercises that generally use weights or some sort of resistance. Flexibility exercises like yoga is a very popular one among our patients, and also just static stretching or traditional physical therapy, and then more balance-based exercises with physiotherapy, Tai Chi, and Qigong. And we'll talk about some more of these in detail. And also there's obviously overlap between many of these, that if you do hot flow yoga, you are also getting an aerobic workout, and many different aerobic or strength exercises can also influence balance. And so this is really great. It means that there's kind of an exercise for everyone, and we'll come back to that. But it makes it a little confusing to study in a scientific way, because there's a lot of apples and oranges here in clinical trials in terms of what interventions are looked at and what kind of outcome variables about symptoms are studied. And so one way that we kind of compare apples and oranges in clinical trials is to do something called a meta-analysis. And I'll spend just a second talking about what that is, because we're going to look at a few of these. And it's basically looking at studies that have used the same outcome. And so in this case, it's in red, the UPDRS-3. So the main sort of motor test for motor function that we do in Parkinson's disease. And then each of these studies or each of these lines is one study. And then on the right, there's a little graph that has 0 in the middle. And if the lines tend to point one way, it suggests that there was a benefit of the exercise intervention. And if the lines are on the other side, it suggests that there was no effect, or that actually the control group seemed to do better in this particular outcome. And really the thing to focus on, if you want to ignore all of that, is that there's going to be a larger colored diamond. It's a black diamond here shown at the bottom that shows you the sort of the overall effect when you combine all of those different studies. So now circling back, this is a meta-analysis that came out a few years ago now, and there have been other ones that say much the same thing, looking at more than 18 randomized controlled trials of different kinds of aerobic exercise. So it may have been treadmill running, it may have been biking, but in one way or another, it was an aerobic exercise intervention. And in this case, that they looked at this UPDRS-3 motor outcome. So across 18 randomized controlled trials, so these are all high quality clinical trials, looking at more than 900 patients and mostly in early and mid-stage PD. As I said, multiple different kinds of interventions looking over about a month to 6 months. And you can see that when you look at the overall effect of aerobic exercise on motor function in Parkinson's, there's a significant effect here. So this black diamond is shifted well to the left of the unity line. We also see that aerobic exercise, so this is looking mostly at different gait or walking type tests. So the 6-minute walk, stride length, walking speed, walking cadence, a test called the timed up and go. So looking at all of these different measures of gait, pretty consistently, you can see that in this particular study, this particular graph, they put the favors exercise on the other side. But for most of these, there's a significant effect or significant benefit of aerobic exercise on all of these different gait interventions or these gait outcomes. This is a meta-analysis that looked at 8 different studies of resistance exercise, so weightlifting or resistance bands or something like that. And they looked at over 400 patients with from early to fairly advanced Parkinson's disease. And not surprisingly, perhaps, there was a very large effect on strength when they measured muscle strength. This was in mostly weightlifting studies. But there were really sort of more moderate to even not really effects on balance, whereas there was still a moderate effect on the UPDRS. So a little bit of different of a pattern looking at resistance training versus aerobic training. And now looking at, this is a meta-analysis looking at different studies that studied Tai Chi and different outcomes in Parkinson's disease. And this is probably one of the best characterized and studied balance exercises in Parkinson's because it can be practiced by patients with many different levels of function, from early, highly functioning patients to patients that are more advanced and may have more difficulty with balance and getting around. And you can see here that there were large effects on overall motor function that were seen mostly in the medicated state, but not as much in the unmedicated state. But that there was both with and without medication, there was a much larger effect on balance. And so to contrast with what we've talked about leading up to this, Tai Chi does seem to have more of an effect on balance than perhaps some other features. We can't discuss fitness in Parkinson's disease without referencing the important role of our colleagues in physical therapy and rehabilitation. Specifically the big and loud, which is a voice therapy, but the big PD-specific training method. As you are all aware, one of the sort of common features in Parkinson's disease is the slowness of movements and that movements get smaller. And this is represented in speech by a quiet voice, or what we call hypophonia, and with motor function with slow movements, or what we call bradykinesia. The Lee Silverman voice therapy, so the voice version of this big program, was initially developed for speech, and it's an intensive therapy based on increasing the size or the volume of the voice. But it turns out that also improves articulation and even swallowing. The big physical therapy program was adapted principally for rehab, focusing on increasing movement amplitude, but also in turn improves the speed of movement and coordination. And this has been examined in a number of clinical trials, and it's clear that there are improvements in overall motor function associated with these programs. And even more than that, I think that we have lots and lots of positive real world experience for patients with Parkinson's disease being referred to physical therapy, rehabilitation medicine, and often using these PD-specific programs. And one point that I want to make is there's, and we have to remember this as much as providers as you do, as people living with Parkinson's disease or their caregivers, that there's not a reason to wait to bring physical medicine, physical therapy into the mix here for what we call prehabilitation, and helping you to discover how to implement physical activity and exercise into your life safely, no matter what stage of Parkinson's that you're at. And we'll come back to that closer to the end. Just to mention very, very quickly as a very, very much an overview, folks will often ask about, things that people don't always think about as exercise, but has some of the characteristics of exercise. So dance or water therapy, or using virtual reality or Nordic walking. So this is a meta-analysis that looked at more than 1,200 patients with 20 randomized controlled trials using very diverse interventions, but sort of falling into that kind of alternative exercise space. And it was clear that each of these has some benefit, but it's not clear that any one is better than any other. And then we'll come back to that important question a little bit later. So to summarize this first little bit of the talk, I think it's clear that multiple exercise interventions improve motor symptoms in Parkinson's disease, that different exercise types may target different types of motor symptoms. So overall motor function, balance, walking, and that aerobic exercise probably has the broadest effects. It's sort of the broadest spectrum of the exercise treatments. And importantly, we sort of have this data from clinical trials, but there are some important questions that we'll talk about closer to the end about how do we translate this into a treatment for Parkinson's disease. Excuse me. So we know a lot that I summarized very quickly about the effect of exercise on motor symptoms, but as I'm sure many of you know very, very well, that the non-motor symptoms of Parkinson's disease, such as mood problems, sleep problems, cognition problems, are common and very important because they cause significant disability. And importantly, the medicines that we use for Parkinson's disease to improve motor function very often do not improve non-motor symptoms and sometimes can worsen them. So employing non-pharmacologic therapies for non-motor symptoms is potentially very important. And I think the top line header here is that we think that exercise is likely to improve non-motor symptoms, in particular mood, sleep, and cognition. We are not as sure about this because they're usually not the primary focus of most of these exercise trials. They are sort of measured at what we call secondary outcomes. And very often for these sorts of exercise trials where you're trying to get people to be motivated and exercise more, or to show up to study visit appointments, they select for patients that don't have a lot of cognitive dysfunction or don't have a lot of mood problems. And so it's been a little more difficult to demonstrate that with the same level of evidence. But there's very good reason to think from the general population and mental health literature that exercise should help with many of these. But we really do need more targeted studies. And I like to talk to patients about that. We can think of it as a good side effect of using exercise to try to improve motor symptoms if we get some benefit for non-motor symptoms. Just highlight a couple of areas where we have the most evidence about exercise and non-motor symptoms. This is, again, a meta-analysis that looked at 9 different randomized controlled trials, more than 250 patients with moderate or greater disease, and with sort of 1 to 3 month durations with exercise with a targeted outcome looking at cognition. And it involved treadmill, dance, Tai Chi, Wii Fit, cognitive motor training, and standard physical therapy. Again, sort of a variety of types of interventions. But overall, when you combine these studies, there were significant effects on cognition. And if you separated out, again, some of these more aerobic things like treadmill training, that's where sort of the biggest bang for the buck seemed to be, or the strongest effect of exercise on cognition. But again, this is limited by, apples and oranges, different types of interventions, different types of outcomes. But certainly there's emerging evidence and good reason to think that exercise is good for thinking and memory and the other elements of cognition in Parkinson's. This is just one relatively small study that was done or published relatively recently, but it's important because it was a high quality randomized controlled trial that was designed specifically to look at the relationship between exercise and sleep in Parkinson's, which is a significant problem. They looked at a total of 55 patients that were divided relatively evenly between a 3 times per week supervised exercise program versus a counseling control intervention where there was no exercise, but they discussed with study staff about sleep habits and sleep hygiene and the like. And this was done over a period of about 4 months. And you can see in the graph here, if you compare these objective measures of sleep function, such as how much total sleep time, sleep efficiency, or slow wave sleep as measured by an EEG, that there were significant improvements or significant benefits relative to the counseling group for the exercise group. Interestingly, there were subjective measures of sleep, so sort of asking, what people thought about their sleep quality and if they felt better in the morning and rested and those sorts of things, that those also improved in the control group as well. And then this is absolutely as hot off the presses as you can get. I saw this on my little sort of feed of literature that I might be interested in this morning, and threw this slide together real quickly. This is a meta-analysis that hasn't even really been published yet. It's been accepted by the journal, and they've put a version of it online, looking at a meta-analysis of exercise and depressive symptoms in patients with Parkinson's disease, looking at 19 studies over 1,300 patients. And you can see, again, just to skip to the headline, that this colored diamond down here shows that there was a significant effect of different kinds of exercise on depressive symptoms in patients with Parkinson's disease. So kind of the holy grail, I would say, of research in Parkinson's disease is trying to develop therapies that not only improve symptoms, that somehow modify disease progression. And there's some reason to think that exercise might be able to affect disease progression. And some of the lines of evidence for that is that there's epidemiologic data, so looking at large populations, people who report exercising more in middle age, so years before you would normally get Parkinson's. There's a significantly reduced risk of developing Parkinson's, and people who do get Parkinson's, it happens at a later age. So there's this idea of either protecting against getting Parkinson's or delaying its onset. If you look in animal models and you do animal models of exercise in animals that have been given a version of Parkinson's disease, that actually slows down or protects against the changes that you can see in cells. And again, that growth factors in these animal models are increased by exercise. And a relatively, until recently, limited clinical trials looking at disease modification in exercise. There's some hint that maybe there could be increases in dopamine receptors, dopamine being one of the main chemicals affected in Parkinson's disease, indicating that maybe there were new cells that could respond to dopamine that were influenced by exercise. A couple of clinical trials that recently came out that don't demonstrate that exercise affects disease progression, but I think start to hint at that. So this is a trial called the Sparks trial that looked at high intensity treadmill training and the influence on motor symptoms of Parkinson's disease. It was over 100 patients that were randomized to either no exercise, kind of a moderate level intensity exercise, and we'll talk more about sort of exercise intensity, and then a very high intensity exercise, getting up to greater than 80% of the maximum heart rate. And importantly, these were very early unmedicated patients. So they were not taking levodopa, they were not taking dopamine agonists, they were not taking an MAOB inhibitor or rasagiline, something like that. So that's important because one of the problems in detecting changes in disease progression is that people who are taking medicine are getting the benefit of their medicine. And so it's sometimes hard to sort out the benefit from the medicine from the benefit that you might be getting from the intervention. But here, exercise is the only intervention. These folks are not taking medication. So if they're getting better in a randomized control trial, we'd argue that it's the exercise that's doing it. And what we see here is that if you compare the change over 6 months in the UPDRS motor score, if your motor score gets higher, that means that there are worse symptoms. So not surprisingly, over 6 months in the control group, there was a little bit of increase. Sorry, I'm pointing at the wrong screen here, that there was an increase in the UPDRS score. So motor symptoms got worse on average. If you looked at the moderate intensity exercise group, there's a hint towards less progression, but it was not statistically significant. Whereas if you look at the high intensity group, well, there's some variation here. Overall, there was essentially no disease progression over 6 months. Now it's a short window, and changes in the UPDRS motor score are not a direct index of disease progression, but it certainly is as interesting and hopeful, and it's hopeful enough that this trial has now moved on into another phase and is currently ongoing. This is another study there. So there was basically an aerobic exerbiking study where that was done in the Netherlands, where they kind of gave their patients Pelotons. So it's good to be Dutch if you have Parkinson's disease, and then performed a randomized controlled trial of this exerbiking, which importantly was done in the home, and not, patients didn't have to come in and go to study visits and things like that. Previously, they've reported in well over 100 patients that this exercise intervention significantly improved motor symptoms. And in this study that I'm illustrating here, they looked at a subset of the people in that original study who had MRI studies of their brain and also underwent some different cognitive testing, and then compared how things looked at baseline compared to a 6-month follow-up. And they found, I'm not going to sort of belabor the details of this here, but you can see that these two boxes over here are different, and that there were changes in connectivity between two different brain regions. And importantly, that the amount of change in connection between the brain regions was directly related in different individuals to how much they improved their fitness during the study, suggesting again, not demonstrating, not proving, but suggesting a relationship between this high intensity exercise, changes in cardiovascular fitness, and changes in brain connectivity that certainly could be related to changes in the progression of Parkinson's disease. So I sort of alluded to this earlier. What's the right kind of exercise? What kind of exercise should I be doing? What's the best exercise? These are questions that frequently come from people living with Parkinson's disease. This is an example of one study. There are more that have tried to compare different forms of exercise, including aerobic exercise, stretching, and resistance exercise. And in this case, many outcomes were improved by all of the exercises, and there really wasn't any kind of group difference between one exercise and the other. And so, that's good. It suggests that all of these exercises are helpful, but it also highlights that it's kind of difficult to compare what might be smaller different effects in these exercise studies, which are generally relatively low numbers of people because they're hard to do and they're hard to get people to do. Another recent study that's tried to address this question. This was an epidemiologic study, again, looking at sort of high level, patient databases rather than, individual patients. There was a Korean-based population study with over 10,000 Parkinson's patients. So that's one of the benefits of these, so-called epidemiologic studies, is that you can look at many, 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 many more people than you can in these clinical trials, these interventional clinical trials. These patients had filled out a questionnaire that where they said, how frequently did they exercise? Did they have high or moderate or low intensity exercise? And then these investigators looked at the relationship between the sort of intensity of activity and all-cause mortality. And again, in an epidemiologic study, they can't, do motor function on these individual patients. You have to look at kind of data that's available in databases, like when did people pass away? And so here in these different graphs, you're just comparing in the dark line, folks who did not report doing this kind of activity, and in the yellow line, people who did, and then comparing mortality. And so the lower line here means that in each of these different cases, the rates of mortality were lower in association with activity. And this was true whether it was light activity like housework, or moderate activity like walking your dog, or more vigorous activity such as treadmill running or high intensity interval training. And so importantly, any of these was good at reducing mortality in people with Parkinson's disease. And when you looked at the relationship between sort of intensity and the outcome, it was basically the more intense activity was associated with a stronger effect on mortality. So we've talked a lot about clinical trial data. Is, how does this work in the real world? Importantly, the Parkinson's Foundation has done a wonderful large QI study where they've looked at care patterns and some outcomes in Parkinson's Foundation's centers of excellence. And these are just two papers that have come out of that study looking at exercise and different outcome variables, showing that in the first one here that exercise improved quality of life and self-rated mobility in Parkinson's disease over time, and that importantly exercise is associated with decreased risk of hospitalization for patients with Parkinson's disease. So important real-world outcomes are affected by exercise in Parkinson's disease as well. And so kind of moving on to the second part of thinking about this, if we assume that exercise in some way, shape, or form is efficacious, and so that means that it showed benefit in a clinical trial setting, how can we make it an effective medicine? How can we actually get it into the hands of patients, of patients living with Parkinson's disease and derive the benefits? Because you can have the most effective drug in the world in a clinical trial, but if it's too expensive or it has terrible side effects, or you can't get it in trucks to pharmacies, it won't be effective because patients won't take it and they won't get better. And as part of that, I think there's two questions. So one is, how do we prescribe exercise like a medicine? And B, will patients take it if we prescribe it? And I'll talk about the second part a little bit first. I put this picture down here because this is one of our former fellows, Sneha Mantri, who's now at Duke, who did an interesting study and looked at self-reported exercise in the Parkinson's Progression Marker Initiative. So the PPMI is a large longitudinal study over time looking at Parkinson's disease progression and markers of progression. And these patients had filled out a questionnaire about how much did they exercise and how intensely did they exercise. And Sneha compared that to guidelines that were existing at the time by the American College of Sports Medicine about how much and how intensively to exercise. Just shown over here is comparing controls to people with Parkinson's disease for moderate activity, vigorous activity, and strength training, and showing, interestingly, that Parkinson's patients reported just about as much exercise, less so for strength training, but for moderate and vigorous activity overall, reported similar levels of activity, but fewer than 40% of patients met these goals for exercise guidelines for the American College of Sports Medicine. And more than 50%, if you look at these graphs, basically report never exercising. And this was, an early population with Parkinson's disease, and they were already involved in a clinical trial, so they might be kind of highly motivated. And so it might even be worse in other populations. And I don't have time to go through it, but Sneha did a second study in veterans where she showed that the self-reported activity levels were even lower. But importantly, she also included a questionnaire to try to understand something about the attitudes of our veterans with Parkinson's disease about exercise, and try to start to get a handle on why some people do or don't exercise. And so interestingly, this is showing motivators of exercise, and I've just highlighted two here that were sort of outliers compared to the others. And in our study, veterans actually said, I did not prefer to be in a scheduled exercise program and did not prefer to exercise with others, which we were a little bit surprised at given the popularity of things like Rocksteady boxing or other kind of group exercise classes. And I'll circle back to that in a couple of slides. And then when we looked at barriers to exercise, so what was it that kept people from exercising? Our veterans were particularly affected by conditions outside of their Parkinson's disease. So their general medical health and factors like pain. And I think the takeaway from this is that we have to take these factors into consideration, not just think about Parkinson's disease status, but again, sort of take a more holistic approach to motivating our patients to exercise and designing interventions for exercise in Parkinson's disease. And that, very importantly, we have to make this individual. The motivation to exercise is individual, and so we have to develop programs that are tailored to individuals. And this is a more qualitative analysis that Sneha did on some kind of just open-ended questions rather than rating scales, and found that among sort of the health domain, fear of falling was a barrier to exercise, and several other groups have reported this too, as we saw other medical comorbidities, problems with motivation, which are prevalent in Parkinson's disease. But a motivator to exercise was the desire to maintain independence and increase health. In terms of a social domain, so exercise partners and PD specific programs were things that motivated exercise. And that is sort of in seeming conflict with our observation that the veterans did not want to exercise in groups or be part of scheduled programs. But what we learned from this sort of more free form answers was that it was really the stigma associated with exercising in a large group with Parkinson's, and that people with Parkinson's felt much more motivated to exercise if they were exercising with other Parkinson's patients, and that is important to remember, and probably explains much of the success of things like Rocksteady boxing and PD specific exercise interventions. So I'm going to take just a second here to tell you a little bit about one of the things that we're trying to do in order to increase physical activity levels in people with Parkinson's disease. And it's derived from a concept called nudging in behavioral economics, and it's sort of changing behavior just by real simple changes in the way that you present information, or not large, heavy-handed interventions. And one of the ways that this has been done in a variety of settings is something called gamification, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. Sort of applying game elements such as level or points to a particular intervention. These are some collaborators, Mitesh Patel and Kim Waddell, who work in what's called the Nudge Unit at Penn, and they've employed these sorts of interventions to increase activity levels in a variety of different disorders such as diabetes and obesity. And we're currently doing a study now to try to use these types of interventions to increase physical activity levels in people with Parkinson's disease. And it's interesting in the era of COVID because we're able to use wearable sensors and digital health platforms. This is a touchless clinical trial. So with these people in this trial never have to come into the office. So if you live in the Philadelphia or kind of the tri-state area and you're a veteran with Parkinson's disease, I think my email contact should be on here. So please feel free to reach out if you'd be interested in something like this. So we recruit folks with Parkinson's disease who in an online forum complete all of their consent, their demographics, any surveys and assessments. We send folks a Fitbit that they can wear to track their activity levels. You get linked up with a digital health platform at Penn called Way to Health that automatically collects all of this fitness data. And then we're enrolling folks in what's called a gamification intervention. So basically, we measure step counts for 2 weeks at baseline. We ask participants to increase that step count by 20% over a 6-week gamification intervention, where basically, if you meet your goals, you level up. If you don't meet your goals, you level down. And then there's like a little bit of a prize at the end. And then we're doing a 4-week follow-up period where we get rid of the intervention to see if there are increases in activity levels during this gamification intervention. Do they last after the game ends? And we're using another wearable sensor that some of you may be familiar with, the Parkinson's kinetograph. It's a commercially available watch-like device that can measure tremor and slowness and other things in Parkinson's disease. So I just wanted to kind of make you aware of a study like this. I should not have used the word advertise. That's not what I'm trying to do. But I think that this is an interesting and exciting approach to increasing physical activity levels in Parkinson's, and we really have to learn how to do that in the real world. All right, so in the last few slides, I'll just talk about, I hope that I've convinced you that exercise can be as beneficial as medicines that we prescribe by mouth for people with Parkinson's disease. And so I think we have to think about how to prescribe it like a medicine. And I'll make the caveat that with this cartoon that I've been talking about a lot of different evidence and clinical trials, we are leaving that realm, and we are now firmly in the realm of this is my opinion, for whatever it's worth. Your mileage may vary. So here's a prescription. I'm sure many of you have seen a prescription like this for carbidopa, levodopa. You probably have never seen a prescription that says carbidopa, levodopa, make sure you take some, right? We don't do that. What we do is we prescribe, 25-100. We want you to take one pill by mouth 3 times a day. We're going to do that for 30 days and check in and see how things are going. We have a type of a medication, an amount of medication, a frequency, and how long we're going to do it for. And I think we very much have to start thinking about exercise in the same way, that rather than get some exercise, we have to say, okay, I want you to do power walking for 2 miles. You're going to do that on foot. You're going to do it once a day. And then after 30 days, we'll check in and see how you're doing with it and think about, refilling that prescription or seeing if we have to alter it. And if we're going to do that, are there guidelines about, what people with Parkinson's should be doing as far as exercise? And this is a little cutaway of recent Parkinson's Foundation guidelines that were developed in concert with the American College of Sports Medicine. And that, the upshot is very similar, that we'd like folks to be getting 150 minutes of 2.5 hours of moderate to vigorous exercise per week, and that you want to use different modalities such as aerobic activity, strength training, balance and agility training, and stretching, and using importantly physical therapists to think about safety, and that you have to continuously, think about how is this program working for you, and to modify the routine over time. And I think that's also illustrated in this little cartoon that I've made here, is that, I think exercise is a medicine that's appropriate at most, if not all, stages of Parkinson's disease. But we have to differ in the way that we prescribe it along the disease continuum, very much in the way that we change the way we prescribe medications. For example, aerobic exercise can probably help with most symptoms. We would like people to be getting aerobic exercise at all disease stages. For early patients, it's a little easier. We can say, go do whatever works and whatever feels good. Go get on a bike, go get on a treadmill, swim laps, whatever works at early stages of disease, when physical capacity is not as much of a limitation. Similarly, strength training, we can think about that the same way that you may be able to, in early Parkinson's disease, kind of do whatever you want, do kettlebell training, do, whatever you'd like. But as you move into later stages of Parkinson's disease, you might have to modify that. It might be resistance bands for weight training, or it might be aqua aerobics, or just using a hand bike pedal in order to get your aerobic, or to get your heart rate up to achieve, aerobic exercise. And similarly, balance and flexibility exercises like Tai Chi are probably beneficial along the entire disease continuum, and probably start to become even more important as gait and balance become more prominent features of disease in later stage Parkinson's, and that aerobic and strength training may become somewhat more difficult. So again, just this idea that we have to change the prescription for exercise over the disease course to target different symptom types, and also to accommodate different levels of physical ability along the continuum of Parkinson's, and that among that any stage, we probably want to be using a multi-domain approach where you're attacking this from different angles. And so while, for an early stage patient, we might prescribe that high intensity treadmill training for 2 miles, or, as mobility becomes a little bit more of an issue, maybe it changes to a stationary bike, or that you get in a pool and do aqua aerobics, where you don't really rely on balance as much. At different stages of disease, you may need a targeted intervention like speech therapy or the big physical therapy to target balance and gait, and that in later stages it might be more Tai Chi than treadmill, but at all of these times we should be thinking about how to specifically target exercise prescriptions to individuals in the individual disease stage. So I'll just finish up with my conclusions. Exercise and physical activity is a good medicine for Parkinson's disease symptoms at any stage. I think there's emerging evidence to think that it might be something that could modify disease progression, but we're still holding out for real concrete evidence on that. In terms of what's best, there are more studies, and I don't really know that this is going to get resolved. And I think that the real answer is whatever you can motivate yourself to do is the best exercise at any stage. In the meantime, it's really important while we're waiting for these answers to work with your provider, but also physical therapists to help determine the right exercise prescription for you. It's one thing to say that your neurologist or your Parkinson's provider should write you a prescription for exercise, but we really have to do that with the input of physical therapists who can spend more time that is really available in most office visits to talk about your motivation and your abilities and what is the right and safe exercise for you. And then the last thing that just like your medication prescription changes over the course of disease, we have to think about changing our exercise prescriptions to target individuals and to target the disease state. I'll stop here and see if we have questions that have appeared in the chat or anything else that people are interested in. Just a little cartoon that we'd all love to have, an exercise pill where you get all the benefits of exercise. And there is an exercise pill, it's just that you have to take the pill and then you have to take it out for a jog and then you have to take it to the gym and then you have to get on a bike with it and it'll work just fine. So thanks very much again for the opportunity to talk to you today. It's really a treat to do this and be part of this. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Morley. Great cartoons. I need to offer you a huge apology because in my quest to get our poll up before you even started, I neglected to tell our wonderful audience that you are the co-director of the Parkinson's Disease Research, Education, and Clinical Center at the Philadelphia VA Medical Center and also an assistant professor of neurology at the University of Pennsylvania. I'm sure people are not surprised by that astounding title. And in fact, we are going to include both you and Dr. Duda's bios in our follow-up email to everyone. Thank you so much for all of you tuning in. Dr. Morley, although we're saying goodbye to him right this second, he will be back at the end for our Q&A. So Dr. Morley, go have a break. Thank you so much for your great presentation.
Great, thank you.
And now it is my honor to ask, and Dr. Duda will be coming up here in just a second. Hello, Dr. Duda. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to get it right this time. You're the director of the Parkinson's Disease Research and Education Clinical Center and co-director, the Center for Neurotrauma, Neurodegeneration, and Restoration at the VA Medical Center in Philadelphia, and as well professor of neurology at the University of Pennsylvania. Thank you so much for being here. Before we bring up your slides, before we ask you to bring up your slides, we are going to check in with our audience again and ask everyone to participate in this poll. And so in case anyone's having difficulty seeing it, what is your opinion about how your diet can affect your Parkinson's disease? So if everyone watching from our watch parties or from your home, please cast your vote. We'd love to know what you think about our question. What is your opinion about how your diet can affect, does your diet affect Parkinson's disease? So this is great. We have a lot of people casting their votes right now. We'll have results in just a moment. So thank you to everyone participating. We'll give it just another second or two. We've got great participation happening here. Interesting. Okay, so our results, a good number, 36% of our audience think that eating healthier helps to treat some of my Parkinson's symptoms. So Dr. Duda, you've got a great audience. I'm sure you're going to provide them with even more information. And with that, I'll invite you to share your screen and take over. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Let's see, one more click. So are you seeing, it's not actually, hold on.
You're getting there.
There we go.
There you are. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Nancy. Welcome to everybody. And as Dr. Morley mentioned, I am very grateful to the Parkinson's Foundation for inviting me to participate in this symposium, and even more grateful to all of you who are in attendance, especially those of you who are veterans. And and I just wanted to take a moment to express my appreciation for your service and sacrifice in doing so. This is going to be a little bit of a whirlwind tour of kind of the rest of this chart. Some we will delve into a little bit deeper than others, but this is part of what I try to get my veterans with Parkinson's disease to practice, which is kind of a whole program of lifestyle choices that we believe can affect your brain wellness, certainly can improve your wellness in other ways, like reducing the risk of heart disease and cancer and stroke and hypertension and diabetes and just about every other chronic disease we suffer from, and very well may improve your PD symptoms and perhaps even your PD progression. Some of that we're still doing the studies to prove, but we think it's entirely likely. And like I said, the side effects are mostly all good things. So starting out with diet and nutrition, this schematic shows, and please don't try to read it or understand it, just take my word for it, that this is a fairly up-to-date representation of what we think is going on in the cells of people with Parkinson's disease that may be problematic. And there's a lot of different problems here. And we don't have any magic pill that stops one part of this chain of events and stops the disease. There are obviously many clinical trials underway, but we've been trying to do this for, I don't know, 20, 30 years. And unfortunately, we haven't come up with anything that clearly stops the progression. But in addition to all those pharmaceuticals, there are innumerable compounds that are found in food that can affect these things as well. And most of this evidence is from test tubes and animal models and things like that. But you know, the food that we eat has more than just sugar, salt, fat, protein, and vitamins in it. It has innumerable compounds that, when taken orally, are a lot like drugs and can have similar effects to drugs. So all of these components of this chain of events that occurs in the cells of people with Parkinson's disease can be affected by these compounds. And I think it's unlikely, frankly, that any one of these compounds is going to end up being a silver bullet that cures your Parkinson's disease. But just like in our treatment of HIV and cancer and a lot of other really tough problems, it's likely going to take a battery of different compounds treating different aspects of a condition to really slow down or stop the progression of Parkinson's disease. And in my humble opinion, I think it makes sense to, until we figure out what that combination may be, to flood your body with these compounds in levels that we know are safe for because they're normally eaten by millions of people around the world on a daily basis by eating foods that are high in these types of potential therapeutics. And so why do I think that might help your Parkinson's disease? So this is a study from a friend of mine, Lori Mishley at the Bastyr University in Washington, D.C. It's called the CAM-CARE in PD study. CAM is complementary and alternative medicine. And what she's doing is try to find out what people with Parkinson's disease are doing to treat their disease themselves, something that is not very well studied. And the way that she's doing that is it's an online study. You can, if you just Google CAM-CARE in PD, you will find the website and you can join it yourself. It's a voluntary study that is all online, and it uses as an outcome, as a measure of how well your symptoms are being managed, another instrument that she developed, the patient-reported outcomes in PD measurement scale, or the PRO-PD. And what this does is there's 28 questions that involve all different aspects of Parkinson's disease symptoms, things like falling and rising from a seated position, dressing, eating, and grooming. And online, you can, at this website here, www.propd.org, you can go and take this scale yourself. And all you do is you take these sliders and you say, okay, for falling, if I never fall, you leave it here. If I fall occasionally, move it somewhere over in here. If you fall daily, you move it somewhere over here. And then she totals up these scores and gets an overall assessment of the severity of your PD symptoms without even ever seeing you in person or laying hands on you to assess your symptoms. It's a patient-reported outcome, which is gaining in popularity in clinical trials. Using that PRO-PD score and thousands of people that are already in the study, she can generate figures like this. This is looking at your score in that PRO-PD score. So if you have 0 symptoms, you'd be down here. If you got 2,800, I guess would be the highest because you get up to 100 in each one. But all these patients, all these dots are one person with Parkinson's disease who've had the disease for this number of years. And so this person has had it for a little over 5 years and they have very minor symptoms. This person has had it for 17 years and has a lot of symptoms. What she is trying to do is find out what is going on with what she calls the positive deviants. These people who have had symptoms for 10, 15, 20, 25 years, and yet their symptom burden is still, good to excellent, low amounts of tremor and falling and depression and things like that. Seeing if there's some magic combination of lifestyle choices that they're making to affect their outcome. One of the things that she looked at already is their diet, and using a food frequency questionnaire, which just asks people, how often do you eat this and how often you eat that and everything, and how those scores affect the PRO-PD score. She's come up with lists of foods that seem to affect it in a positive way, meaning you have a lower score in general on that outcome if you eat fresh fruits and vegetables, nuts, fish, olive oil, wine, turkey, coconut oil, fresh herbs, spices, things like that. All these are it's a observational study, so we can't say for sure about cause and effect, but in general, people who eat more fresh vegetables have lower score on that symptom severity scale. Alternatively, there are certain things that are typically associated with raising your symptom burden on that scale, starting down at the bottom here, including canned fruit and diet soda and canned vegetables and fried food and beef and soda and ice cream and yogurt and cheese, and some things that don't have much of an effect either way. But if you look at all of the things that seem to be beneficial, what they resemble is something like the Mediterranean diet, which I think most of you have probably heard about. It's a diet or a nutritional pattern, really, wherein you focus mostly on whole foods like whole grains, fruits and vegetables, lower amounts of olive oil and high fat foods, and then even smaller and seafood, lots of seafood and smaller amounts of cheese, poultry, meats, desserts, things like that. It's very the things that seem to be associated with lower symptom burden kind of fall in line with this type of dietary pattern. And so based on that and a lot of other types of studies, which I'll go into a little bit, I do suggest that people eat something like the Mediterranean diet. One of the big side effects, if you want to call it that, of the Mediterranean diet is that it almost certainly reduces your risk of getting dementia or cognitive impairment. Obviously, one of the main concerns of a lot of people with Parkinson's disease, in addition to limitations in mobility, limitations in thinking are a big fear. there's overwhelming evidence that the dietary patterns like the Mediterranean diet reduce your risk of developing that. So I think that alone is a good enough reason for me to eat a diet like this. And if it slows down my Parkinson's progressions, if I had it, then great. But this is enough for me. So general rules about nutrition, for varying reasons, evolution and other things, we get a lot of pleasure out of food, and that's important. I certainly don't want you to slow down or stop the progression of your Parkinson's disease if you're going to be miserable for the rest of your life. So food gives us pleasure. So eat what you need to eat to be happy, right? If you have to have a cheeseburger every week to be happy, well, then have a cheeseburger every week. If you have to, there's certain foods you don't like, don't eat them. There are plenty of healthy choices out there, and the main note is that food is also supposed to nourish us, and the rest of the time, if you're not eating food to be happy, and I think people would do well to find other sources of entertainment other than their food, but then eat the things that make us healthy, and that means eating mostly a whole unprocessed plant food diet. So nuts, seeds, vegetables, fruits, beans, other types of legumes, whole grains, teas, spices, anything that comes from a plant, basically. Eating more of those and eating them as unprocessed as possible. The problem with processing foods is that you lose nutrients when you do that. So eating them as close to you can as the way they come in the produce aisle is probably a good idea. Eating more variety and color is probably also a good idea. All of these compounds that we get from plants tend to work together in synergistic ways, so that if you have, if you're trying to take turmeric to get some curcumin, something that many of you know about, if you just take turmeric, you're not going to absorb very much of it. But if you take it with a little bit of pepper, there's a different compound in pepper that increases the absorption of curcumin by about 1,000%. So eating a variety of different plant foods at the same time and at different times is great. And also eating the rainbow, we like to say, the more color, the better, because often those colors are generated by those compounds that are giving the beneficial effects. So if you have a choice between a red onion and a green onion and a white onion, eat the red one. Red cabbage versus white cabbage, eat the red cabbage, and try to eat all different colors on your plate every day. And then, in general, following something like the Mediterranean diet or the MIND diet, which is kind of a combination of the Mediterranean diet and a diet that was called the DASH diet, that was originally developed for the prevention of hypertension. That may be the best choice currently, although any one of those two, or what's called a whole foods plant-based diet, will almost certainly be helpful. If you want to eat the MIND diet, then it's fairly, I like it because it's fairly straightforward. You don't have to count calories. You don't have to try to keep track of all kinds of different ingredients. All you do is 10 things that you try to eat more of, and 5 things that you try to eat less of. And this was developed essentially to try to help people prevent getting dementia. So like I said, something really important for all of us, including those of us with Parkinson's disease. And so the 10 things that you want to eat more of include green leafy vegetables, 6 or more servings per week, so once a day. Other vegetables, at least one other vegetable in addition to the leafy ones, once a day. Berries twice a week. Berries are loaded with antioxidant and anti-inflammatory compounds, 2 classes of compounds that we think are very important. And so eating them, and it says at least twice per week, but eating them every day is probably even better. Most people in America don't eat enough nuts, and there's a lot of healthy components in nuts, including healthy fatty acids and fiber and other things. So eating a handful of nuts, obviously, depending on what the situations with your weight, if you're having trouble keeping your weight down, then eating a handful of nuts and not more is probably a good idea because they are high in calories. But many people with Parkinson's disease actually have a difficulty maintaining their weight. So eating lots of nuts and seeds and nut butters and seed butters and things it's a great choice of ways to increase your caloric intake and try to maintain the weight you're at. If you're using oils, then using olive oil as your main oil is part of this diet. And then the whole grains, rather than eating white bread and white pasta and white pizza dough and things like that, eating those that are made out of whole wheat or other whole grains, or just eating the whole grains themselves is a big part of the diet. Eating 3 servings of those per day. Eating fish at least once a week is recommended. And if you're going to eat fish, then eat fish that are high in omega-3 fatty acids, including salmon, sardines, mackerel, anchovies, things like that. Eating more beans is important. So at least 4 servings per week of beans. And I tell people to eat even more than that. They do say to try to eat chicken or turkey at least twice per week. I think you can argue about whether or not adding turkey to an otherwise balanced diet chicken or turkey to an otherwise plant-based diet definitely gives you more benefit. It may be that this is partially to eliminate more of the red meat in the diet, but that's part of the recommendation. And then drinking no more than 1 glass of wine a day. For a lot of people who eat a diet that's not so good, drinking a glass of wine gives you exposure to some resveratrol and other compounds in wine that you wouldn't get normally if you're eating a standard American diet. But alcohol is a toxin, and it's not clear that wine is actually good for you if you eat a really healthy diet. But for the average person drinking 1 glass of wine may be a good idea. And then there's 5 foods that they suggest not to eat. Eating processed oils like margarine, avoiding trans fatty acids and things like butter to less than a tablespoon a day is one of the things. So they want you to limit your intake of those. Cheese, they want you to eat less than 1 serving of cheese per week, which I think a lot of people find difficult, but there are good reasons with the saturated fat and other parts of cheese to try to avoid. Red meat, no more than 3 servings per week. And again, I think you could argue that there's nothing you can get out of red meat that you can't get out of other plant foods. So if you can, eating even less than that may be a even better idea. Fried foods, obviously, we all know that fried foods have lots of problems with them, so eating them less than once per week is a good idea. And the same thing with sweets. Again, these are treats, and if you have to eat them to be happy, then of course do it. But if you don't, try to avoid them. If you want more information, just Google the Mind Diet online. You'll find all kinds of sources. But this one from healthline.com I thought was a nice resource for finding out more. If you want to learn a lot more about nutrition and Parkinson's disease, then I encourage you to look for this previous webinar that I did with the Parkinson's Foundation from 5 years ago or so now, where we talked for a whole hour just about nutrition and the gut microbiome and more recommendations about what I suggest people with Parkinson's disease eat. Obviously, it's hard to copy this web address down. So if you just go to YouTube and search for Parkinson's Foundation expert briefings, and then the title is Nutrition, Parkinson's Disease, and the Gut Microbiome, will be the first thing that comes up. So the second part of this all-around wellness program that I wanted to talk about was stress management. And we all have stress, and we all know that it probably leads to some of the chronic diseases that we suffer from. And there's a really interesting paper out of a Dutch group that's headed by Bas Bloem, talking about how stress and mindfulness may affect Parkinson's disease, including hypothesizing about how chronic stress elevates glucocorticoid levels, the stress hormones that we express when we're under stress, and how those things change processes in the brain, and then how that may affect the cells in your brain, leading to things like Parkinson's disease. So an interesting attempt to explain why it's a good idea to decrease your stress levels if you can, and find better ways to deal with them if you can't. And they looked at the literature to date on mindfulness, which is one way to reduce your stress. And I'll talk a little bit about more in a second, but of the 8 trials that have done in Parkinson's disease and mindfulness, 6 out of 8 of them showed an improvement in depression, and 4 out of 7 showed an improvement in anxiety scores. Motor symptoms were only studied in 3 different studies, but 2 of them reported significant improvements after starting up a practice like mindfulness. The same group put out another study where they surveyed 5,000 patients, similar to the study that Dr. Mishley was doing, and asked them about their stress and mindfulness. And not surprisingly, people with PD experience more stress than controls, and they had higher levels of anxiety, depression, and lower scores on the kind of state level of mindfulness. And I think most of you know that when you're stressed, your tremor gets worse, your stiffness may get worse, other symptoms get worse. So they confirm this in this study as well. And a couple interesting things that came out of it. So of all the people in the study, 5,000 people, there were different things that we know can help decrease your stress level, right? We know that physical therapy and physical exercise can decrease the amount of stress that you're feeling. And many people were taking advantage of these and getting benefits from them. Relaxation exercises like yoga or stretching, or there's all kinds of different things that could be included into that. And then mindfulness, which is a type of meditation that I'll explain in a second. And lots of people are doing lots of these things, and I encourage you guys to as well. And this is self-reported, so obviously people know if they're doing physical therapy or mindfulness meditation. But according to them, the effects of those practices of mindfulness on their PD symptoms was positive in nearly every example, decreasing the amount of anxiety, depression, tremor, walking problems, sleep problems, slowness, and dyskinesias to varying amounts. But most of them, all of them in the positive effect range. More importantly, maybe, or equally important, is that the more you do, the more effect or more benefit you get. So in this graph, they show how many times you're doing a particular relaxation technique and how much you think it improved different symptoms. And so as you can see, someone like with depression here, if they practice mindfulness less than once a month, they have a certain level of depression. But as they increase from a few times a month to weekly to several times a week to daily to several times a day, the amount of benefit they perceive that they're getting increases in nearly every one of the symptoms. And the main reason people haven't done it is because they haven't thought about it or didn't know anything about it, but were interested. So one other study that supports this is a study that came out a couple of years ago looking at an actual mindfulness intervention in PD. They had 138 subjects that were randomly assigned to either 8 weeks of mindfulness yoga or stretching and resistance, and with one session with a leader, and then asked to do 2 other 20-minute sessions per week. So not a terribly big burden, but they saw good improvements in depression, anxiety, quality of life scores, and maybe most intriguingly, saw fairly robust decreases in overall motor function. The MDS-UPDRS is the way that we measure motor symptoms in Parkinson's disease. And they showed about a third reduction in those, which if you had a medication that did that, it would get FDA approval immediately. Some evidence, again, it's open label, so you have to take it with a grain of salt. You don't know if they just felt their symptoms were better because they knew they were doing these interventions, but it was compared to a stretching and relaxation exercise program, and that didn't have the same magnitude of effect. So there may be something special about mindfulness meditation. And so what is mindfulness? It's you can define it as the basic human ability to be fully present, aware of where you are and what you're doing, and not overly reactive or overwhelmed by what's going on around us. That's a definition from mindful.org. Essentially, it's the ability to be aware of what's going on in this present moment without judging it. If you think about it, I do this with all of my patients. I tell them to close their eyes and try to focus on their breathing and focus on it for as long as they can. And within seconds, literally, most people realize that they're thinking about something else other than their breathing. So proving that we're not really too good at focusing our attention on something for very long and not having other thoughts pop up. And a lot of times those thoughts aren't very helpful, actually, but all of us have the ability to be mindful. When you're focusing really hard on something like a sport or driving or something like that, we're usually more mindful. And obviously some people aren't very mindful when driving, but this state of being aware of what's going on right here, right now, without judgment, can be strengthened with training, and that's called mindfulness meditation. There's many different forms of mindfulness meditation, either focusing on your breathing or walking or eating or anything that's happening right now. If you just focus on that instead of worrying about what happened in the past or worrying about what's going to happen in the future, you're being mindful. And there's other types of practices within the mindfulness tradition as well that can help other things, like improving your compassion and quality of life and outlook on things. And so if you just Google mindfulness, you'll find a million different resources. Some of them are better than others, but I encourage all of you to look into it and try to find something that you think may be helpful. And if you want, in the discussion, I can give some recommendations for apps that are particularly useful or web pages or whatever. The next one, sleeping. I think most of us know and recognize that sleep is very important for our mental and physical health. And people with Parkinson's disease have a problem because they often don't get enough. So there are a number of sleep problems that happen in Parkinson's disease, some fairly specific to Parkinson's disease, some not so much, but they include insomnia, having difficulty falling asleep, having your medications wear off at night, so having difficulty turning over in bed and waking up because of that, or their symptoms, something called sleep fragmentation, where you fall asleep okay, you don't have insomnia in the beginning of the night, and this is probably even more common than insomnia, but after a certain amount of time, you wake up and you feel like it's the morning, you feel like you're wide awake and you can't get back to sleep. There's something called REM sleep behavior disorder, where you act out your dreams, often, punching, kicking, yelling, hurting yourself or your bed partner, which is a fairly specific symptom of sleep dysfunction in Parkinson's disease. And then restless leg syndrome, which is not. There's more people with restless legs that don't have Parkinson's disease than do, but it does tend to go along with lots of people with Parkinson's disease express symptoms like that as well. And then obviously sleep apnea is very common in the general population, so it's going to be very common in the Parkinson's populations as well. And we know that untreated sleep apnea has detrimental effects on your vascular system for your heart and your brain. So getting that addressed is important too. And then excessive daytime sleepiness is a problem. If you don't sleep well at night, you're going to be sleepy during the day. But some people who sleep through the night and feel restored, like I ask my patients, when you wake up in the morning, do you feel like you've had a good night's sleep? And if you if you feel that way, I'm less concerned that they have a primary sleep disorder. Most people with PD don't, and so I often refer them to sleep specialists, but some people do, and then they still feel sleepy, and there are different ways we can manage that as well. And these are just some of them. Obviously, don't forget to talk to your physician about them. Most good movement disorder neurologists will talk about sleep problems, but often general practitioners or general neurologists will not. But so it's up to you to bring up whatever symptoms you're having with the sleep and discuss them with them. And consider involving a sleep specialist if you think you're not getting an adequate response from your typical provider. Because many of these problems have good treatments. Some of them are pharmaceutical, but many of them are not. If you have sleep that is non-restorative, meaning you don't wake up feeling refreshed, I think most of those people should have a sleep disorder referral and a sleep study. If you have insomnia, especially beginning of the night insomnia, where you lie in bed for hours trying to get to sleep, then try something like the CBTI programs. If you're a veteran, you can easily get this in the VA. It's the cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. In fact, it's the #1 recommended therapy for insomnia in the VA before you try medications and things like that, and it often helps. And then for everybody who's having trouble with their sleep, learn about and practice sleep hygiene. And just like if you didn't shower and clean yourself regularly, your personal hygiene would suffer. If you don't practice certain things regarding sleep, then your sleep hygiene suffers. And here's a quick list of excuse me, some things that are involved in typical sleep hygiene programs, including maintaining a regular sleep schedule. Basically, all of these are intended to train your brain that when you're going to sleep, you're supposed to sleep, and when you're not in bed, you're not sleeping. And so improving the atmosphere during which you're sleeping, and improving the likelihood that you're going to fall asleep and stay asleep is the idea. And there's many good references. If you just Google sleep hygiene, you'll find many good references, and these are two of them here. But it's things like not exercising, drinking alcohol, or having big meals soon before you go to sleep, because those things tend to impair your sleep detrimentally. Lowering the light and often the temperature as you approach bedtime can be helpful. We all know about blue light and how it can affect your sleep. So not using a screen like your phone, TV, computer, or whatever for at least an hour or more before you go to sleep, because when you're doing that, you're telling your brain, the parts of your brain that used to wake you up in the morning when the sun came up, that it's time to get up. And your brain doesn't know the difference between sunlight and the blue light coming out of your iPhone. So it's important to limit that before bedtime. So I encourage you to try those things. Social connection is the last one of these that we're going to talk about. But there's a growing recognition that is very important. Obviously, COVID led to some of that recognition because of all of the disconnection that we all experienced during COVID. But this is a study from my colleague Indra Subramanian using the data from Dr. Mishley's CAM-CARE and PD study, and looked at things other than diet, like in the other study. Here, for example, is exercise. And the more you exercise, the lower your score on that pro-PD symptom severity score. So if you exercise 30 minutes a day, 3 days a week, you have a very good benefit. If you exercise 7 days a week like that, you have an even better benefit. But interestingly, if you have lots of friends, it's almost as good as exercising 3 days a week. If you practice stress management, like mindfulness meditation, it's a good benefit. It's like eating a lot of fruits and vegetables. But if you have a lot of stress, or especially if you self-report as being lonely, you have a very detrimental effect on your symptom severity, as assessed by this one study, which, it's difficult to untangle all the effects of all the different things we're looking at. But suffice it to say that there's good reason to believe that if you're lonely, your PD symptoms are going to be worse. And if you have a lot of stress, they're going to be worse as well. And maybe even more importantly, every symptom you have is going to be worse. So this blue outline is for people who do not feel lonely. This is the severity of their symptoms. And the, so for sexual dysfunction, they have this much. But if the people that do feel lonely, they report having this much, 30, what is it, 34 compared to 47. And this is visual disturbances. Every one of these, people who feel lonely feel like they have more problems with that symptom. And depression is a big one, and it's possible that depression can make other symptoms feel worse. So it's sometimes it's a little difficult to kind of untangle that, but people who are lonely are often depressed. So improving social connection and your the number of friends you have and how often you see people seems like it may be helpful to reducing your symptoms. So what should you do? Doing things like this. I mean, this is almost, obviously right now you're not really seeing other people other than me, but at least you're seeing me, and you're not doing something that's completely impersonal. But then joining like a support group nearby, either in person or virtual. I think they're both beneficial. Staying connected to family and friends is very important, especially as mobility changes. That can be a real problem for people. They feel embarrassed to get out and see their friends and family because they don't want to be a burden and other things, but it's detrimental to your health to do that. Volunteering in your community, if you don't have a lot of family and friends to hang out with, is a great way to increase your interpersonal connections. And also, I think, as many of you know, who have lived a life of service or have served our country, know that service clearly improves mood and self-worth and quality of life and many other things. So I think that's a great idea. And then jumping in with what Dr. Morley was saying, joining an exercise group. Again, there's many of them online. If you just search exercise groups for Parkinson's disease online, you'll find innumerable ones. Many of them are free. Some of them have small monthly fees if they include like a physical therapist or a trainer with them. But I think it's a great way to connect with people, or going to your Rock Steady gym and doing those classes or any other fitness classes. So I'm going to stop there. I forget exactly when I was supposed to stop. I think I actually saved some time for us for questions. These types of talks always come up with innumerable questions, and I would be happy to start answering them if that's. I forget exactly. I'm sorry if that's not exactly where we're headed.
No, you're spot on, Dr. Duda. Thank you so much for that fantastic presentation. We will be taking questions from our web audience now, and I also warmly welcome Dr. Morley back on our Zoom screens to help answer questions from his presentation. I will say in advance, we get a lot of questions, so if we're not able to get to yours, please call our helpline. We'll also include the VA number for their help service as well. There's no shortage of people who can help you. So please, if we don't get to your question, it's not that it's not important. That time is always of the essence in these Zoom meetings. Dr. Morley, welcome back. Thank you both for your presentations. So fantastic. I have not introduced myself yet. I'm Melody. I'm actually Nancy's counterpart in the New England chapter as a community program manager. So I'm happy to moderate this Q&A session here. We did already get a lot of great questions. And if you haven't already submitted your questions, or maybe a question inspires you to ask another, that Q&A button is still open on the bottom banner of your screen. Feel free to type it there, and we will try to include as many as we can. This always feels like the lightning speed round, doctors, so here we go. We have this first question here for Dr. Morley, and at any point, feel free also to chime into each other's questions. I'll assign them the best I can based on sort of your presentations. Dr. Morley, what are your thoughts on wearables and smartphone apps like the Stride PD app or watches? How might that impact sort of a fitness routine and health status?
Yeah, I think it's a great question because I think there are so many to choose from, and it's sort of hard to know what to make of it. I think that they can be very useful. I think that just something as simple as a Fitbit or a step counter or whatever, it gives you a way to compare yourself over time and say, am I really making progress? Am I really hitting the goals that I want to? I think I would, so I think that those are great. They, can be used to design some of these sort of interventions to, to motivate you to do more and more, whether it's in the setting of a clinical trial or not. I think that the wearable sensors in terms of monitoring symptoms are also really, really interesting. They're maybe not as well studied. And I worry sometimes that patients sort of get a little too attached to them and are my symptoms this much better today or that much worse today. And so, to encourage people not to get too wrapped up into it. But I think anything that gets people engaged and interested in participating in their own care and interested in, how they can take control in their Parkinson's disease are good things.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And Dr. Duda, I kind of was prompted in Dr. Morley's answer. I know there's also on some different phones, there's sort of sleep apps to track sleep. What are your thoughts on things like that?
So I don't know of any research on that in Parkinson's disease. There's some studies I think that are trying to look at that, but I think it kind of, as Dr. Morley said, if if you try it and you find you're sleeping better, then sure. I also would be hesitant to have people focus too much attention on nitty-gritty scores and I'm 97% sleep value versus 94% or whatever. I would probably steer them more towards instead of, if you're, especially if you feel like you're sleeping well, I don't think there's a great reason to do it. If you're not, then I would steer them more towards the CBTI and other treatment related, focused apps and programs rather than the monitoring ones. I think even the ones that do very well is a little, if people who study them find that they're perhaps not as accurate as we would like to think they are. If you're into gadgets and you like it, give it a shot, but don't put all your eggs in that basket. And if you're having problems, then talk to your doctor about it, get referred to a sleep specialist, try something like CBTI or sleep hygiene tips and things like that.
Thank you both. Dr. Duda, this next question is for you. Since my Parkinson's diagnosis, I've noticed I've lost weight. Do you have any suggestions for ways to gain weight healthily while not just eating donuts and sweets and high protein foods?
Right. Great question. Like I said in the talk, it's not an uncommon problem. Obviously, someone who is moving all the time with tremor or dyskinesia is at risk of burning more calories than they're taking in, and often, for most people, it's a good thing that it's hard to eat too many calories on a healthy diet. If you're not eating much oil or fried food or high caloric density foods, then you tend to lose weight, which for the majority of Americans is a good thing. For people who already are a normal weight or are trending low, that can be a problem. And so, like I said, healthy choices for weight maintenance, high caloric healthy choices are focused mostly around nuts and seeds and things like that, nut butters. Sometimes there, pastas or carbs can be whole wheat pasta, healthy pastas and healthy sources of carbs can have a lot of calories in them. But it is a problem on occasion. And, now there's so many good choices for plant-based alternatives for dairy products and so you, again, they're not, compared to certain things, vegan mayonnaise and vegan cheese or whatever are not as healthy, but they are a good source of calories. And so things like that, I guess I would suggest as well.
Awesome. Thank you. Let's see here. Our next question, Dr. Morley. We have some questions here about exercise and whether or not it can really help with balance or freezing problems. And if not, or if so, what else can they do to help with these challenges? Who can they see?
Yeah, so that's a really good question because it's an example of two things that don't always get better with medication and become much more difficult to treat the longer that folks have had Parkinson's. I would say that they're not exactly the same thing. That balance is kind of one thing, and freezing this getting stuck is I maybe think about a little bit separately. I talked about in some of the slides I showed. Studies looking at specific exercise programs like Tai Chi or Qigong or, physiotherapy, prescribed for Parkinson's disease, and that those are useful and evidence-based interventions to try to improve balance. But again, certainly doing any of this in consultation with your neurologist or a physical therapist, and sort of to make sure that if you're at risk for falls because you have bad balance, that you're not engaging in activities that are going to put you at higher risk. Freezing is tough. It's really, really tough. I think Dr. Duda would agree that clinically it's one of the more challenging things that we face. For freezing, we talk a lot about sort of when does it happen, and is there some correlation that we can do something about between the medicines wearing off, with off freezing, or is it happening, with on freezing? Some people experience that, so if you learn that, then you can, hopefully make adjustments to the medications, or perhaps use a rescue therapy for situations where people get stuck or get frozen. When there aren't those sort of obvious relationships, it's a little trickier, I think. And I think what we will do is refer our patients to physical therapy, because sometimes physical therapists can sort of mimic real world situations a little better than we can in the office. Is it corners? Is it stairs? Is it doorways? And then work with patients to develop strategies to kind of get out of a freezing episode. Amongst this group of veterans, often sort of a count off and starting a march is something that some people find very helpful, or picking out a target and stepping over it. There are even studies with little lasers that shoot out of canes or other visual targets. And so for us, I think for freezing in particular, working together with physical therapy and rehab is really, really important.
Awesome. Thank you. That's really helpful. Thanks for distinguishing those two very different sort of symptoms. Dr. Duda, we have a question here. Can you speak a little bit more about timing of medications with meals, and also sort of related the protein factor as well?
Yes, thank you. A great question, and something that when I have a full hour to talk about, I certainly include it. And in the last, if you Google my name and nutrition and videos, you'll find several online for different organizations that I've done over the years that go into great depth about this. But so for those of you who don't know, Cinnamon is two compounds. It's carbidopa and levodopa, and levodopa has the same shape, or it's similar to certain types of amino acids that you get when you eat protein, and it is absorbed into the body and into the brain by the same receptor that absorbs those amino acids. So the thought is that if you take your Cinemat, which has levodopa, at the same time when you have a lot of amino acids from a high protein meal circulating in your blood, it's going to have a hard time, well, first of all, getting into your blood through your gut and then getting into your brain. And some people will notice a difference if they take their Cinemet half an hour before they eat. They have a certain amount of benefit. If they take it, during or after they eat, and they have some protein in the meal, they may not see as much of a benefit because not as much of it is getting into the brain where you need it. Early on in the disease, that's unusual. Usually there's enough reserve of levodopa in the brain to avoid that. But particularly later on, as more cells have died or are having trouble, you're more reliant on kind of the blood level of levodopa. And in that case, it can make a big difference. And so what we ask people to do typically is to take their Cinemet 30 minutes before or an hour after a meal. And if they're having a lot of problem with fluctuation, I think in addition to the pharmaceutical treatments that we use for motor fluctuation, which is a feeling that your medications kick in and they're working pretty well, and then after a certain delay, they're not working anymore. And then you kind of go like that all day. You take a pill, feel better, feel worse, take a pill, feel better, feel worse. One thing to try is to try something like a protein redistribution diet, where you take the vast majority of the protein that you're consuming in that day in the evening meal. So, because at night, in the evening, you're not moving around as much. There's no great evidence that you need to be eating protein all day, so it's fine nutritionally, but can help your Cinemet work better throughout the day. And the vast majority of people in America eat too much protein anyway. There's, the meat and dairy industry and others have led us to believe that we have to eat a hunk of meat every meal every day, and it's just not true. There's no evidence that you need that much protein to be healthy. And 97% of Americans or something like that get enough protein, whereas only about 93% of Americans don't get enough fiber. So instead of asking me, the guy who doesn't eat meat, where I get my protein, I'll ask you where you get your fiber. And if you're only eating meat and cheese and standard American diet kind of stuff, you're almost certainly not getting enough.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think that could be a whole other discussion. You're so right. 45 minutes is just not enough time to get into sort of the timing, the protein, fiber, everything. So thank you. Similar question for you, Dr. Morley, just sort of about timing and exercise. Is there a better time of day to implement an exercise routine? Morning, afternoon, before or after medications? I know I don't want to complicate things for our viewers and trying to get this puzzle together, but it's an important question, I think.
Yeah, I think it's a really important question. And I will definitely keep it simple with maybe a couple of caveats. Just like what's the best exercise is whatever will get you to exercise. When is the best time? Whenever works for you to exercise. There are morning people, there are night people, there are afternoon people. I know for me personally, if I don't exercise first thing in the morning, it's probably not happening. So like I have to focus on sort of scheduling it in for them. Whereas some people need to do whatever they need to do in the morning and they want to exercise in the afternoon. A couple of the caveats. So you brought up a really important one, I think, which was medication. And so I think you want to, certainly if you're going to be doing anything, complicated that involves balance and, a risk of injury, you certainly want to be doing it when you feel like you're in a good on state. If you know that, you have more trouble in the afternoon than exercise earlier in the day. The other caveat, I would say is, what it's interesting in the sleep paper that I put up there, I focused on the fact that exercise helped, or chronic exercise helped a lot of these sleep variables that they measured, but they also looked at the effect acutely, like of one exercise session, depending on when you do it. And if done too late in the day, some people do find that exercise interrupts their sleep. And so I think that, people have to just, it's a question of sort of paying attention to your own body. But from a sort of like physiologic basis, is there, morning, afternoon, night, a time at which you get the biggest benefit from exercise, or that it has effects at some time of the day that it otherwise wouldn't? I don't think there's any good evidence for that as far as I'm aware.
Well, thank you. Actually, you just answered our next question about whether an exercise routine can impact sleep. So I will kind of rephrase it a little bit for Dr. Duda. What about mindfulness practice? Can that help with sleep? Do you recommend maybe doing it before bed? Yeah.
So good question. I think so. First thing from the last question, it's important to recognize that exercise, Jim's right, there's some evidence that some people, if they do it late in the afternoon or evening, it affects their sleep. But for the most part, people who have a regular exercise program have better sleep than people who don't. So a good reason to do it. For a mindfulness practice or other stress reduction technique like yoga or prayer or whatever your Tai Chi, whatever your choice is, I in general tell people, again, do it when you will do it. The problem with waiting too long to practice mindfulness is that in sitting and focusing on your breath, if you're tired, you can fall asleep. Now, is that the end of the world? No. If you're tired enough that you're going to fall asleep while you're trying to do something else, well, then maybe you need a nap. And, I'm a believer in naps. I think there's particularly people who are older and have Parkinson's disease, it's much better to take a nap that is not a long nap. If you sleep too much during the day, you're going to have trouble sleeping at night. And there's a lot of day-night reversal in Parkinson's disease, whether that happens. But, fairly brief naps of 30 minutes or so can be very restorative and, better than some other alternatives. But for, like Jim said, you probably want to do it when you feel fairly awake and on, and but more importantly, just finding it to make it a habit, because there's good evidence that doing it, even 5 minutes a day can make a real difference. And if you do that for a while and slowly increase how much you're doing, you'll get even more benefit. But it has a lot more benefit that way than doing all 30 minutes in one day. So if there's a time where you can fit it into your routine, because so much of our life is habit and routine, and just find a slot where it can fit into your routine and then just become as routine as brushing your teeth or whatever else, then that's a great approach.
Thank you. And this next question looks like it's for you too, Dr. Duda. We talked a little bit about fibers and proteins. What about the vegan diet? How might it compare to the Mediterranean or Mind diet? And similarly, the kind of keto diet that's popular right now?
Yeah, so good question. So a vegan diet is a diet that does not eat any animal-based foods. So it doesn't include meat, poultry, seafood, or dairy. A vegetarian diet is the same thing, except they allow dairy products. A ketogenic diet is, strictly speaking, is one that puts your body into ketosis, where your carbohydrate consumption is so low that you're not generating enough energy for your body to do its normal functions, and you start burning your own fats to produce something called ketones, which are also used by brain cells in an emergency, if necessary, to function. And I think it's a complicated story. There is some evidence. Some people feel a whole lot better on a ketogenic diet. They feel less mental fogginess and other things. There's some small studies of ketogenic diets in Parkinson's disease that suggest an effect in an open label fashion. So for people who are younger, I worry that a ketogenic diet, which is high in meat products and saturated fat and things like that, I worry about the long-term consequences of your brain function regarding your vascular supply, because it's not clear that a ketogenic diet is great for your heart and brain. You get clogging of the arteries if you're eating so much saturated fat. a vegan diet, it can be healthy because it's mostly plants. However, the difference between a whole food plant-based diet and a vegan diet is that French fries, Twinkies, potato chips, and beer, or let's go with something else, soda, are all vegan, but they're not health foods, right? So that's why there's so many unhealthy college-aged vegans out there, because they're doing it because they, you know, perhaps because of they don't want to harm animals, which is a great reason, but they're not being smart about it, and they're eating junk food instead. That's happens to be vegan, but not healthy. So whole food plant-based, the plant-based is the not eating animals or animal products. Whole food means eating it in a less processed way. So a potato is actually a healthy food. If you take a potato and you bake it and eat the skin and everything, there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, eating a lot of it, you can bring in a lot of calories, but it's mostly when you take a potato and you slice it up and you deep fry it and you put cheese on it and whatever else, that it becomes an unhealthy food. So the less processing, the better, and the way that we prepare foods can make a difference as well. So, I mean, vegan, again, I always say, compared to what? A vegan diet is much better in most cases than the standard American diet, which is abbreviated SAD for a reason. But it's not necessarily a healthy diet. I think, you know, again, go back to some of my previous videos or look online and you'll find out the difference. And I encourage people to decrease the amount of plant foods they're taking in, but even more importantly, and it's, you know, it's harder to get rid of something than it is to add something. So adding more healthy plant foods is a better approach than trying to eliminate unhealthy animal foods and other foods. Eventually that'll happen because you won't eat, you'll feel better, and you'll just continue to decrease the amount of animal foods you're eating, for most people anyway. But yeah, so ketogenic, it's hard to say. If you're young, I would discourage it. You also lose weight on a ketogenic diet most of the time because you're just not taking enough calories to maintain your weight. So that can be a problem for people with Parkinson's disease. And if you're older and you're not at all worried about your vascular function, then it's possible that it may be helpful, but it's no miracle treatment that some people suggested it is. At least the evidence is weak for that.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I know we got a few questions about that diet in particular. We're just almost at time, so we've got, I think, just enough time for 2 more questions. I want to make sure that people are getting information about their local VAs. Dr. Morley, I know you had shared a lot of different research happening. We will share those slides again, folks. So the information for those studies are on the slides, and we will get those to you in an email. But this question can be for either of you. How can someone find out about the research that's happening at their local VAs?
So all VAs have a research department. If you're in particular looking for Parkinson's research, just going to the neurologist if you have one. Some VAs don't even have a neurologist, but going to the clinicians there and asking about research opportunities. And if you don't get any answers, asking them if there's a research department. And they often have research fairs once a year or so where they bring in patients and talk about different research programs that are going on. In general, it's the bigger VAs that are affiliated with university affiliates that have the broadest reach of research opportunities. But there's no easy way. There's no website that I'm aware of that I can say, go here and you'll find out which ones are available. The clinicaltrials.gov is a good place to look for clinical trials in general for Parkinson's disease or for anything else. It's a website run by the government that almost all clinical trials are listed there, and they will often list the sites where they're being performed. So if you're looking for clinical trials in particular, that's where I would go.
Yeah, I was just going to mention, I think you could probably select keywords for veteran and your city in clinicalknowledge.gov. And similar, you might be able to do something similar with the Fox Trial Finder, just to sort of, you use a general research or general resource for clinical research and then try and tailor it to your geography and
There are also obviously our website, www.parkinsons.va.gov, is a good place to get more information about research that's ongoing. And we have newsletters that come out talking about research, and there are 6 of these Parkinson's disease centers around the country, and then 50 to 60 satellite sites. So there's ample opportunities, and the Parkinson's Foundation and VA collaboration that started a couple of years ago has done a great job of expanding awareness and access to those opportunities.
Awesome. And with just about a minute left, I want to thank you both so much for your fantastic presentations and joining us for this Q&A session. I know, again, our viewers' questions are so important to us. If we did not get to your question, please do call our helpline, 1-800-4PD-INFO. I see my colleague queuing up our final slides, but again, Dr. Duda, Dr. Morley, thank you. We also have Gretchen Glenn here, who has been such a great support to this program as well. For our viewers, please know you're not alone. Our respective organizations are here for you, and we look forward to connecting with you. If you have a question that, again, was not addressed, please do reach out to our helpline. It's staffed by my colleagues and Parkinson's specialists at 1-800-4PD-INFO. You can also call the VA at 1-800-949-101. Actually, that's 1001, extension 205769. Thank you again for your service to our country. We hope that you enjoy the rest of your day. And a final slide here. Again, thank you, Dr. Morley and Dr. Duda, for sharing your time and expertise with us and the Veterans Parkinson's community. We thank you to all of our attendees joining us today. We hope you find today's discussion really helpful, and you can review those slides at a later date. And thank you, Gretchen Glenn, again, social worker and associate director of the Philadelphia Parkinson's Disease Research, Education, and Clinical Center, for all your assistance. And many thanks to Genentech for your support of our mission in serving the Parkinson's veterans community. Immediately following today's program, you'll see a survey pop up on your screen. Please try not to ignore it. Take a moment to complete the evaluation. This really helps us to know how to improve our programs to better serve you, and your feedback is so important to us. Again, one last final reminder that this program was recorded, so you'll get a link with the video and an email and the slides. You'll have everything there for you. And thank you so much for joining us. I hope you all have a great afternoon.
Thanks, Melody.
Bye,
Gretchen, everybody.
Thank you.